I found out I wasn't family anymore from a photo I was never supposed to see. Not from a fight, not from a phone call, not even from silence. From a smiling picture of my parents holding hands under a banner that said, 40 years together, surrounded by everyone who apparently still counted. My father told me, "Oh, we did that yesterday," like he was reminding me the trash had already been taken out. 3 hours later, my sister posted just family. So I liked it. And I commented one sentence. "Congratulations. I guess the mortgage and property taxes are yours now." 3 minutes later, the post vanished. Then my phone lit up like a warning system someone had just realized they couldn't turn off. My name is Erin Caldwell. I'm 33 years old. I've been serving in the United States Army for over a decade, and I've learned that there are two kinds of silence. There's the silence you earn after a long day when everything is done and no one needs anything from you. And then there's the silence people give you when they've decided you don't belong in the room anymore. The second kind is louder. That morning I had just come off a 14-hour rotation. My shoulders still held that dull, deep ache you don't really notice until you stop moving. I remember sitting on the edge of my bunk, unlacing my boots, slowly thinking about one thing that had nothing to do with orders, reports, or schedules. My parents' anniversary. 40 years. It wasn't the kind of milestone you missed. Not in our family. My mother believed in dates like that, anniversaries, birthdays, anything that proved time had held together longer than it should have. I checked the time, still early enough. I figured maybe they were doing dinner that evening or the next day if they wanted to make it a weekend thing. Either way, I didn't want to miss it again. I had already missed Thanksgiving last year because of deployment. Christmas had been a video call with bad reception and worse timing. You start to keep count of absences even if nobody else does. So I called. It rang twice before my father picked up. Yeah. No greeting, just that. Like I'd interrupted something that mattered more. "Hey, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just got off shift. I wanted to check what time are we doing the anniversary dinner." There was a pause. Not a long one, just enough to feel like something small had been decided on the other end. "Oh," he said, "casual." "Too casual. We did that yesterday." For a second I thought I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry, what?" Yeah, he repeated a little sharper now, like I was the one making it complicated. "We had people over, it was nice. Your sister handled most of it." I stared at the wall in front of me. There was a faint scratch across the paint, something someone had dragged against it months ago. "You had it yesterday." "Erin," he sighed, "you're always busy. We didn't want to wait around and make a whole thing out of scheduling." Make a whole thing. 40 years of marriage. Reduced to something inconvenient because I might need to plan around it. "I could have made it work," I said quietly. "You could have told me." Another pause. Then the line that explained everything without explaining anything. "It was just family." Just family. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it landed too clean. "I see," I said. "Don't start," he warned, already irritated. "It was a simple dinner. Your sister was here, your aunt came by, your grandmother." "Right," I cut in softly, "family." He didn't correct me. That mattered more than anything else he could have said. "Well," he added like he was doing me a favor, "we'll send you some pictures." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. "Sure," I said, "that'd be great." We hung up like two people who hadn't just redefined something important. I sat there for a while after the call ended, my phone still in my hand, my boots half off one lace trailing across the floor like I'd stopped mid-step and forgotten why I started. There's a specific kind of realization that doesn't hit all at once. It settles. Quietly. Like dust. You don't feel it land. You just notice suddenly that everything looks different. I told myself not to make it bigger than it was. They probably kept it small. Last minute. Didn't think it mattered. Didn't think I'd care. That last one stuck. Because they were right. I didn't care about the dinner. I cared about the decision. 3 hours later, I was back in my room, showered, uniform folded, sitting with a cup of coffee I wasn't really drinking when my phone buzzed. A notification. My sister. Kelsey. She didn't call. She didn't text. She posted. I opened it. The photo filled the screen. My parents stood in the center, my mother leaning into my father like she had for as long as I could remember. There was a cake on the table behind them. Gold lettering. Balloons. Decorations I knew my sister had picked out because they looked exactly like the kind of things she curated for every event, clean, coordinated, just enough to feel like effort without actually being one. Around them were faces I recognized instantly. My aunt, my grandmother, my cousin, even a neighbor who had no business being there unless it was something planned ahead of time. Everyone smiling. Everyone included. Everyone looking directly into the camera. Except me. The caption sat right underneath. 40 years, just family. I read it twice. Not because I needed to. Because I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining the part where I had been erased and labeled at the same time. Just family. There are sentences that don't sound like attacks until you realize who they're excluding. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could have closed the app. I could have ignored it. I could have texted her privately. I could have done what I'd done my entire life, handle it quietly so nobody had to feel uncomfortable. Instead, I tapped the heart. Liked the post. Then I hit comment. I didn't type fast. I didn't need to. Congratulations, I wrote. I guess the mortgage and property taxes are yours now. I read it once. No anger in it. No exclamation points. No insults. Just a sentence. A true one. I hit post. Then I locked my phone and set it down on the table. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then it buzzed. Once. Twice. Then again. By the time I picked it back up, the notification count had already climbed into the teens. Messages. Calls. Missed calls stacking faster than I could process them. And right at the top, the post was gone. Deleted. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes for a picture they were proud enough to share with the world to disappear like it had never existed. 3 minutes for just family to turn into something that needed to be hidden. My phone vibrated again. Dad. Declined. Mom. Declined. Kelsey. Declined. Another call, and another and another. I watched the screen light up over and over, each name flashing like a different version of the same realization. They hadn't called me when they set the table. They hadn't called me when they cut the cake. They hadn't called me when they took the photo. But now they remembered exactly how to reach me. I leaned back in my chair, phone in my hand, and let it ring. There's a moment when a system you've been holding together quietly starts to shake, where everyone suddenly understands what you were worth. Not when you're there. When you stop protecting it. And in that moment, staring at 50 missed calls stacking on my screen, I realized something that made everything else finally make sense. They didn't panic because I was hurt. They panicked because I had just said something out loud that they had been very careful to keep invisible. And now everyone could see it. The version my family told about me was clean. That's what made it effective. Clean stories travel well. They fit into small talk. They sound reasonable over casseroles and church coffee. They make people nod in that satisfied way, like they've understood something important about someone else's life without having to know any details. In their version, I was the difficult daughter. The one who left. The one who chose the army over family dinners, holidays, birthdays, and everything else that proves you belong somewhere. I was the one who didn't call enough, didn't visit enough, didn't show up. My sister Kelsey was the opposite. She was present. She lived 15 minutes away. She brought wine to dinners. She posted photos with captions about gratitude and family, and how lucky she was to still have both her parents together after 40 years. She was easy to love in public. I was easier to misunderstand. If you asked my father, he'd tell you I was always independent to a fault. He'd say it like a compliment that had gone slightly wrong, like something admirable that had turned inconvenient. She's doing her thing, he'd tell people, always has. And if someone pressed a little harder, if they asked why I wasn't around more, why I hadn't been at Thanksgiving, why I hadn't flown in for Mom's birthday last year, he had a way of answering that made it sound like the distance was my choice. She's busy, he'd say, military life, you know how it is. What he never said was that when things actually mattered, when something broke, when something went wrong, when the numbers stopped adding up, I was the one he called. Not Kelsey. Never Kelsey. Because Kelsey didn't do that kind of work. She did the kind that showed. She arranged flowers. She picked out decorations. She knew how to set a table so it looked like something out of a magazine. She knew how to smile in photos and stand close enough to Mom that it looked like she had always been there, always would be. She knew how to be seen. I knew how to fix things nobody wanted to talk about. That difference doesn't show up in pictures. It shows up in bank statements, in emails, in late-night calls that start with, "Hey, I hate to ask you this, but..." The house was where it started. Or more accurately, where it almost ended. About 5 years ago, my parents' house stopped being stable. From the outside, nothing changed. Same driveway, same porch, same neatly trimmed lawn that my father took pride in, like it proved something about him that no one was allowed to question. But inside, things were slipping. My father had always been good at looking solid. That was his skill. He knew how to project control even when he didn't have it, especially when he didn't have it. What he wasn't good at was keeping track of the things that actually determined whether control was real or just noise. Interest rates shifted. A refinancing that had seemed smart at the time started to tighten instead of relieve. Property taxes went up, then up again. A couple of business decisions, ones he never fully explained, didn't land the way he expected. Nothing catastrophic on its own, but stacked together. It started to feel like pressure building behind a wall. The first time he called me about it, he didn't say the word problem. He said, "I just need a second set of eyes on something." I was sitting in a makeshift office halfway across the country working through a stack of reports that had nothing to do with my family and everything to do with people who actually paid me for my time. "Sure," I said, "what's going on?" He sent over numbers. Not all of them. Just enough to make it look manageable. It took me less than 10 minutes to see what he was trying not to say out loud. "Dad," I said, "this isn't just a paperwork issue." Silence. Then a small exhale. "I've got it under control," he replied a little too quickly. That was always his first move. Control first, truth later, if at all. "How far behind are you on the taxes?" I asked. Another pause. "Not behind," he said, "just tight." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling like the answer might be written there. "Send me everything," I said. "I already did." "No," I said calmly. "You sent me what you're comfortable with. Send me what's real." That was the first time he went quiet in a way that meant he was deciding whether to let me see behind the curtain. Eventually he did. Not all at once. In pieces. Each one small enough to downplay, together impossible to ignore. Late payments. Fees. A missed notice that should have been handled months earlier. A tax adjustment that had gone unaccounted for. It wasn't a single disaster. It was a pattern. And patterns are harder to fix because they don't announce themselves. They just keep repeating until something breaks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. He didn't answer that directly. He never did. Instead, he said, "I didn't want to worry you. You've got your own life." That line sounds generous. It isn't. It's a way of avoiding accountability while pretending you're protecting someone. "What's the worst-case scenario?" I asked. He hesitated. "Then quietly we could lose the house." There it was. Not said loudly, not dramatized, just placed on the table like something that had always been there. I closed my eyes for a second. The house wasn't just a house. It was the place everything in our family revolved around. Holidays, arguments, milestones, the background of every photo Kelsey had ever posted with the word family underneath it. Losing it wouldn't just be financial. It would be a public failure. And my father cared about that more than anything. "What do you need?" I asked. That was the moment everything shifted. Because that question did two things. It acknowledged the problem, and it made me part of the solution. "I just need a little help stabilizing things," he said carefully, like he was negotiating with his own pride. Temporary. Temporary. That word matters. People use it when they don't want to admit something is bigger than they can handle. How much? I asked. He told me a number. It wasn't small, but it also wasn't the whole picture. I knew that. He knew I knew that. Neither of us said it out loud. "Okay," I said, "I can cover part of it, but we need to restructure how this is being handled." "I've got it," he insisted. "No," I said evenly, "you don't. That's why you called me." Another silence. Then softer, "What do you want to do?" That was the first time he had ever asked me that in this context. Not told, not directed, asked. I walked him through it. Payment schedules. Priorities. What needed to be handled immediately versus what could be negotiated. Who to call. What to say. What not to say. It wasn't glamorous. It was work. The kind of work that doesn't show up in pictures. Over the next few months, that temporary help became something else. A gap here. A payment there. An emergency that needed to be handled before it turned into something bigger. Each time it was just enough to keep things from tipping over. Never enough to be obvious. That's how it stayed invisible. I wasn't paying everything. I was covering the difference. The shortfall. The part that would have made the whole thing collapse if it had been left exposed. And because it was always partial, always quiet, always handled without announcement, it never became part of the story. Kelsey didn't know the details. She knew things were tight sometimes. She knew Dad had stress. But she didn't see the numbers. She didn't see the emails. She didn't get the calls at midnight asking if I could just handle one thing. And my father never corrected her. He never said your sister is the reason we're still in this house. He said things like Erin's good with paperwork. Or she helps out when she can. Helps out. Like I was answering emails. Like I was doing something small and convenient. Like the difference between keeping the house and losing it wasn't sitting in my account history. And the more I helped, the more normal it became. Not appreciated. Expected. That's how systems like this work. They don't announce themselves as unfair. They just adjust until the person carrying the weight starts to believe it's theirs. By the time everything stabilized, by the time the immediate threats were gone, and the house looked solid again from the outside, the story had already rewritten itself. My father had managed through a tough period. My mother had kept things together. Kelsey had been there. And me, I was still the daughter who didn't show up enough. The one who chose distance. The one who wasn't there for the moments that mattered. So when my father said it was just family, he wasn't contradicting himself. He was continuing the story he'd been telling all along. The one where what I did didn't count. And what I didn't do, what I couldn't do because I was somewhere else keeping other systems from breaking, was the only thing that defined me. The house stood. The photos looked perfect. And the person who had helped hold it together didn't make the guest list. That's the kind of truth people don't forget. They just learn not to say it. Until something forces it out. Families like mine don't need meetings to decide who gets blamed. They don't sit around a table and assign roles out loud. It happens quieter than that. It happens in the way one person's mistakes get explained, and another person's existence gets questioned. By the time you're old enough to notice it, the structure is already set. My father didn't wake up one day and decide I was the difficult one. He just figured out early that I was the one who would keep going even if it hurt. And once you show people that they build around it, I was the one who finished things. The one who followed through. The one who didn't need reminders, didn't need praise, didn't need to be chased down to do what needed to be done. That sounds like a compliment. It isn't. It's a warning sign. Because in families like mine, the person who needs the least becomes the one everyone takes the most from. Kelsey figured out a different system. She didn't compete with me on responsibility. She competed on presence. She learned how to stand in the right place at the right time. How to laugh when my father laughed. How to soften when my mother looked tired. How to step in just enough to be noticed but never enough to be burdened. She didn't fix problems. She managed perception. And perception in our family was everything. By the time we were adults, the roles were so set that nobody questioned them. Kelsey was the good daughter. The one who stayed close. The one who showed up. The one who made things look like a family. I was the one who left. The one who chose something harder. The one who became, in my father's words, someone who doesn't need us anymore. That line always sounded like admiration when he said it to other people. It sounded like accusation when he said it to me. You don't need us, he'd say usually when I pushed back on something small. Not a fight, not a blow-up, just a moment where I didn't agree. You've got your own life, you've made that pretty clear. He said it like independence was betrayal. Like building something for myself meant I had chosen against him. The truth was simpler. I had chosen something that didn't revolve around him. And that was something he never learned how to accept. When I enlisted, he told people he was proud. He said all the right things. My daughter's serving, he'd say, nodding in that way that made it look like he understood what that meant. But at home it was different. You didn't have to go that route, he told me once the night before I left for basic. We were standing in the kitchen, same place most of our conversations happened, neutral ground in theory, in reality his territory. I wanted to, I said. You could have done something closer, he replied, something that kept you around. Around. Like proximity was the same thing as connection. This is what I want, I said again more firmly this time. He looked at me for a long second. Then he nodded once. Just don't expect everything to stay the same while you're gone. That wasn't a warning. It was a boundary. His. Not mine. And over time he enforced it. Not with rules. With omission. Calls got shorter. Updates got fewer. Decisions got made without me. At first I thought it was just distance. That's what everyone says about military life. You miss things. You're not there. You can't expect people to wait. And I accepted that. Because some of it was true. I wasn't there for everything. I missed birthdays. I missed holidays. I missed the kind of small, ordinary moments that build familiarity over time. But here's what people don't talk about. Missing something isn't the same as being removed from it. And at some point, my absence stopped being a logistical reality and started being a convenient narrative. I wasn't just gone. I was excluded. Quietly. Consistently. And always with a reason that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. It was last minute. We didn't think you'd make it. You're so busy. Each one small. Each one easy to accept on its own. Together. A pattern. The house became the center of that pattern. Everything important happened there. And everything important started happening without me. When things were good, Kelsey was there. When things were difficult, I was called. Not invited. Not included. Called. There's a difference. An invitation says we want you here. A call says we need something. And over time I stopped confusing the two. The night my father first admitted they might lose the house, I didn't hesitate. Not because I didn't understand what it would cost me. Because I did. Financially. Emotionally. Time I didn't really have. Energy I was already spending somewhere else. But it was still my family. And there's a reflex you don't outgrow no matter how far you go. When they're about to fall, you reach. So I reached. And for a while it worked. The immediate pressure eased. The worst-case scenarios got pushed back. Things stabilized just enough to look normal again. And as soon as they did, the calls changed. Less urgency. Less gratitude if there had ever really been any. More expectation. Hey, can you just check something for me? Quick question about a form. I think something's off with the numbers again. Always small. Always manageable. Always framed like a favor. Never acknowledged as a pattern. And Kelsey, she stayed exactly where she had always been. At the table. In the photos. In the version of the story that people saw. She knew things weren't perfect. She wasn't stupid. But she didn't push. Didn't ask. Didn't step into the parts that required anything more than being present. And my father didn't ask her to. He protected her from that. Not consciously, maybe. But effectively. Because if she never saw the full picture, she never had to choose. And if she never had to choose, she could stay exactly where she was safe, liked, and untouched by the weight I was carrying from a distance. That's how systems like ours survive. Not through balance. Through separation. One person handles reality. Another person represents it. And the one who represents it gets the credit. By the time the house was stable again, by the time the numbers lined up, and the threat of losing it faded into something my father could stop talking about, it was like none of it had happened. There was no conversation. No acknowledgement. No moment where anyone said, hey, that mattered. Just a return to normal. Except it wasn't normal. Because now I knew exactly where I stood. Not at the table. Not in the photos. Not in the definition of family that my sister could post online without hesitation. I was behind it. Holding it up. Quietly. And the second I stopped doing that, everything would have to readjust. The only question was whether they would admit it. Or pretend it had never been there in the first place. Turns out they chose a third option. They erased me. And expected the structure to hold anyway. That's the part they got wrong. There's a moment when a system realizes it's been exposed. Not broken, not destroyed. Just seen. That's the moment panic starts. Not because anything new happened, because something old stopped being hidden. My comment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't accuse anyone of anything they hadn't already done. It didn't even explain itself. Congratulations, I guess the mortgage and property taxes are yours now. 12 words. That's it. No names, no numbers, no context. Just enough truth to make the people who understood it feel it immediately, and the people who didn't start asking questions. And in families like mine, questions are more dangerous than accusations, because accusations can be denied. Questions have to be answered. The first voicemail came from my father. I let it play without picking up. "Aaron," he said, voice tight but controlled like he was trying to keep it from slipping into something else. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to take that comment down, now." No greeting. No concern. No, "Are you okay?" Just damage control. The second one came 5 minutes later. "Call me back." The third wasn't even a voicemail. Just silence on the line like he expected I'd answer out of habit. I didn't. Then my phone lit up again. Mom. Her voice was different. It always was. Softer, thinner, like she was trying to hold something together that had already cracked. "Sweetheart," she said, almost whispering, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your father is very upset. Your sister's upset. People saw that comment. It's not appropriate." Not appropriate. That word has a way of shifting blame without saying it directly. What did I say that wasn't true? I asked, more to myself than to her. She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "Can you just delete it? Please, we can talk about everything later." Later. Another word that sounds harmless. Another way of saying, let's move this somewhere no one else can see it. I ended the call without agreeing. Without arguing. Just ended it. Because I had spent years having conversations in private that got rewritten in public. I wasn't doing that again. Kelsey's message came next. Not a call. A text. Of course. That's how she handled things when she didn't have control of the narrative. What the hell was that she wrote? No greeting. No context. Just immediate offense. I stared at the screen for a second. Then typed back. What part? 3 dots appeared instantly. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. You know exactly what I mean, she replied. Why would you comment something like that on a public post? Public. That word mattered. Because she was the one who made it public. She was the one who chose to post a picture of a family-only event. She was the one who decided who counted and who didn't. But somehow I was the one who crossed a line by responding where people could see it. I congratulated you, I typed, and clarified something important. The dots came back faster this time. This isn't funny, Aaron. I'm not laughing. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, what are you trying to do? That question sat there for a second. Because it wasn't really about the comment. It was about the shift. The one she could feel but didn't fully understand yet. I'm not trying to do anything, I replied. I'm just not pretending anymore. That was the last message I sent her. Because at that point, the calls started overlapping. Not just my immediate family. Extended. An aunt. A cousin. Even my brother-in-law Mark, who had never called me directly about anything in his life. Until now. I let them all ring. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because I wanted to hear what they said when they didn't think I was listening. And what they said was always some version of the same thing. Confusion. Concern. And underneath it something sharper. Fear. Not fear for me. Fear of exposure. What does she mean by that? Is something wrong with the house? I thought everything was fine. Those questions weren't coming from my parents. They were coming from the people who had just been at that dinner. The ones who had stood in that photo. The ones who had smiled under a banner that celebrated 40 years of stability. 40 years of something solid. Except it hadn't been solid. Not for a while. And the only reason it hadn't cracked was because I had been holding pressure in places no one else could see. Quietly. Consistently. Without making it visible. Until now. I opened my email. Scrolled back. Not far. I didn't need to go years. Just months. Because the pattern had been steady. Messages from my father. Short. Direct. Always framed as small. Need your help with something real quick. Can you take a look at this? Just a temporary thing. Attached were documents. Numbers. Deadlines. Things that didn't look urgent if you didn't understand what they meant. But if you did, they were alarms. Missed payments. Adjusted tax assessments. Notices that required responses before penalties escalated. Each one a piece of a system that only worked because someone was paying attention. And that someone had been me. Not publicly. Not visibly. But consistently enough that things never got bad enough for anyone else to notice. I clicked on one thread. 3 months back. Property tax adjustment. The number had gone up. Significantly. My father's message had been simple. Can you cover the difference this cycle? I'll square it later. Later. I had wired the amount the same day. No follow-up. No confirmation. Just a short reply. Got it. That was it. No thank you. No acknowledgement of what it actually meant. Just handled. I moved to another thread. Insurance. A lapse that would have triggered a cascade of other problems if it hadn't been caught in time. Can you put this on your card for now, he had written. For now. That was 6 months ago. I never asked for it back. Not because it didn't matter. Because asking would have turned it into something he could argue about. And arguing with my father was never about facts. It was about control. The more I scrolled, the clearer it became. Not just the numbers. The pattern. Every time something slipped, I stepped in. Every time there was a gap, I filled it. Not completely. Just enough. Just enough to keep the system from failing. Just enough to make it look like everything was under control. And because I never covered everything at once, no one else saw the full picture. They saw stability, not the effort behind it. They saw a house that still stood, not the hands holding it up. I leaned back in my chair, my phone buzzing again beside me. Another call. This time from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Hi, Aaron, a hesitant voice said. This is Aunt Carol. I saw your comment. I'm sure there's some confusion, but your father seemed very stressed when I left earlier. If there's something we should know... She trailed off. Because she didn't want to say it directly. She didn't want to ask the question that mattered. Is everything okay? Because if everything wasn't okay, then everything she had just been part of, every smile, every toast, every picture, meant something different. And people don't like that. They don't like realizing they've been standing inside a version of reality that only works if certain things stay unspoken. My comment didn't break anything. It didn't change the numbers. It didn't create a new problem. All it did was remove the layer that made everything look normal. And that was enough. Because once people start looking at something directly, they can't unsee it. Even if they try. My phone buzzed again. Dad. Again. I watched his name light up the screen. Watched it fade. Then light up again. He wasn't stopping. Not this time. Because this time it wasn't about controlling the story. It was about the possibility that the story might collapse without me holding it in place. And for the first time in a long time, I understood exactly where the leverage was. Not in what I said. In what I had stopped protecting. They weren't panicking because I embarrassed them. They were panicking because for the first time the truth had been said in a place they couldn't contain. And now they had to deal with it. Whether they wanted to or not. By the time the calls slowed down, the house was already louder than it had been during the party. Not physically. I wasn't there to hear voices raised or doors closing harder than they needed to. But I knew the pattern. I knew the sequence. First denial. Then irritation. Then the quiet scramble to contain whatever had slipped. And finally, when none of that worked, the attempt to pull everything back into private where it could be reshaped. That's where they wanted this. Private. Fixable. Controllable. So they could decide what it meant. Not me. Not anymore. My phone buzzed again. A text from my father this time. Call me now. No punctuation. No softness. Just command. I stared at it for a second, then set the phone down without responding. Not out of defiance. Out of discipline. Because I knew exactly what that call would be. Not a conversation. A correction. He would explain what I meant. Tell me what I should have said instead. Reframe the situation until it sounded like I had misunderstood something obvious. And if that didn't work, he'd move to tone. Why are you doing this? Why are you making it public? Why are you hurting your mother? Always the same sequence. Always ending with the same expectation. That I would step back. Soften it. Delete it. Let him restore the version of reality that worked for him. I wasn't doing that. Not this time. Instead, I opened my laptop. Not social media. Not messages. Email. Documents. Files. The things that don't shift when someone raises their voice. The things that don't depend on who tells the story better. Receipts. Records. Proof. I didn't need to build anything new. It was already there. I just had to stop looking at it as separate moments and start seeing it as a whole. One transaction doesn't mean much. A pattern does. I started organizing. Dates first. Timeline. When the tax issue came up. When the insurance lapsed. When the first temporary transfer happened. When the second one followed. When temporary turned into recurring. I added amounts. Not estimates, exact numbers. Pulled directly from statements. Then context. Emails. Messages. Voicemails. Not all of them. Just enough. Enough to show the pattern without turning it into something emotional. Because emotion is easy to dismiss. Structure isn't. As I worked, the noise from my phone faded into the background. Not because it stopped. Because it stopped mattering. They could call as much as they wanted. They couldn't change what had already been done. And they couldn't change what I was finally allowing myself to see clearly. This wasn't about one dinner. Or one post. Or one comment. This was about years of quiet adjustments. Years of stepping in just enough to keep things from breaking. And years of that effort being treated like it didn't exist. Not out of malice. That would have been simpler. Out of convenience. Because as long as it stayed invisible, it didn't have to be acknowledged. And as long as it didn't have to be acknowledged, it didn't have to be repaid. Not financially. Not emotionally. Not at all. My phone buzzed again. Mom? This time I answered. Not because I was ready to talk. Because I wanted to hear what she would say when she couldn't pretend I didn't exist. Hi, I said. A small intake of breath on the other end. Erin, she said, relief and tension tangled together. Thank you for picking up. I didn't respond. I let the silence sit. She filled it. Your father is very upset, she continued. And Kelsey's been crying. People are asking questions. It's a lot right now. Of course it was. Because for the first time, the pressure wasn't being absorbed quietly. What do you need me to do? I asked. It was a simple question. Direct. Neutral. It forced her to say it. Not imply it. Not soften it. Say it. Another pause. Then carefully, can you delete the comment? There it was. Not are you okay? Not did we hurt you? Not why didn't we include you? Just, can you remove the thing that's making this uncomfortable? I leaned back in my chair. Closed my eyes for a second. Then opened them again. No, I said. The word landed harder than I expected. Not because it was loud. Because it was final. Erin, she started, voice tightening. Please don't do this. It's not worth it. It's just going to make everything worse. For who? I didn't ask that out loud. I didn't need to. We both knew the answer. It's already worse, I said quietly. You just didn't have to look at it before. Silence. Then softer, we didn't think you'd mind. That one almost got me. Not because it was cruel. Because it was honest. They hadn't thought I'd mind. Because I had trained them not to expect a reaction. Because every time something like this happened before I had absorbed it. Adjusted. Moved on. Made it easier for them. So they kept doing it. That's how patterns form. Not through one big decision. Through small things that go unchallenged. I didn't mind the dinner, I said. I minded the decision. She didn't answer. Because there wasn't a version of that sentence that didn't force her to see what they had done. We can talk about it, she said after a moment. We can all sit down and... No, I said gently, not at the house. Another pause. Then where she asked? A public place, I replied. Why? Because at home you rewrite things. Because at home voices get louder and facts get quieter. Because at home the person with the most authority controls the outcome. But I didn't say all that. Instead I said, because I'm not having this conversation somewhere, it can be turned into something else. She understood. I could hear it in the way she exhaled. Slow. Resigned. I'll tell your father, she said. Okay. We hung up. I sat there for a moment, the quiet settling around me again. Then I looked back at the screen. At the timeline. At the numbers. At the structure of something that had been invisible for too long. And I realized something that changed the way I saw all of it. I wasn't holding them accountable for the past. I was removing myself from the future. There's a difference. Accountability invites negotiation. Removal doesn't. They wanted me to erase a comment. What they didn't understand yet was that I was erasing a role. And once that role was gone, everything else would have to adjust, whether they were ready for it or not. We met on a Monday. Not at the house. That had been my condition. Neutral ground. Public. Somewhere that didn't belong to anyone. We chose a diner just off the highway, one of those places that smelled like coffee and grease, and had booths worn smooth from years of people sitting across from each other, pretending they were having normal conversations. It was mid-morning, not busy but not empty. Enough people around that no one would raise their voice without being heard. That mattered. When I pulled into the parking lot, my father's truck was already there. Parked slightly crooked, like he hadn't bothered correcting it after turning in too fast. That told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. He wasn't calm. He wasn't in control. He was reacting. I stepped inside and saw them immediately. My father sat at a booth near the window, arms folded, posture rigid. My mother sat across from him, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. And Kelsey was there too. Of course she was. Because this wasn't just about me and him. It was about the version of the family that had been presented, and the one that was now being questioned. I walked over, slid into the seat opposite my father, next to my mother. No one spoke for a second. That's another thing I learned in the army. Silence isn't empty. It's information. My father broke it. What was that, he asked. No greeting. No pretense. Just straight to the point. I met his eyes. What? That comment, he snapped. Don't play games with me. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't shift in my seat. I wasn't playing anything, I said calmly. I stated a fact. His jaw tightened. You embarrassed this family, he said. There it was. Not you hurt me. Not you misunderstood. Not we made a mistake. Embarrassment. Optics. Always the first concern. I responded to a public post, I replied. On a public platform. About something that directly involves me. It didn't involve you, Kelsey cut in sharper than I expected. It was Mom and Dad's anniversary. I turned my head slightly to look at her. And the house they celebrated in, I asked. Does that involve me? She hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because hesitation is what happens when someone realizes they don't have the full picture. That's not what this is about, she said quickly. It is exactly what this is about, I replied. My father leaned forward. Enough, he said. We're not doing this in here. I glanced around. A couple at the counter. A trucker reading something on his phone. A waitress refilling coffee. No one paying attention. But they could. And that was the difference. You're right, I said. We're not doing what you usually do. His eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? It means we're not rewriting this after the fact, I said evenly. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Nothing dramatic. No slamming it on the table. Just setting it down between us. This is what I've been doing for the past few years, I said. He looked at it like it was an insult. I don't need paperwork, he said. I need you to fix what you broke. I almost smiled. Because that sentence said everything. What did I break, I asked. The image, he shot back. The way this family looks. People are asking questions now. There it was again. Not the structure. Not the reality. The image. I didn't change the image, I said quietly. I just stopped protecting it. That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders shifted slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. Kelsey leaned forward, eyes flicking to the folder. What is that? She asked. Context, I said. For what she pressed. For the part of the story you weren't told, I replied. I opened the folder. Turned it so they could see. Not all of it. Just the first page. Timeline. Dates. Amounts. Clean. Organized. Impossible to dismiss as emotion. My father didn't look at it right away. He looked at me. Like he was trying to decide whether acknowledging it would give it power. Aaron, my mother said softly, we don't need to do this like this. Yes, we do, I said. Because this is the only way it doesn't disappear later. I tapped the page. Property tax adjustment, I said. 3 months ago. You asked me to cover the difference. My father's eyes flicked down. Then back up. That was temporary. Everything was temporary, I said, until it wasn't. I flipped to the next section. Insurance lapse, I continued. 6 months ago. I put it on my card so it wouldn't cascade into something worse. He shifted in his seat. That was handled. Because I handled it, I said. Kelsey leaned closer now. Reading. Actually reading. Her expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. What is this? She asked quieter this time. A sample, I replied. A sample of what she pressed. Of the part where I've been involved, I said. My father cut in. You're inflating this, he said. You're making it sound bigger than it is. I looked at him. Steady. No, I said. I'm making it visible. Silence. Then he tried the angle I expected. Families help each other, he said. That doesn't mean you get to throw it in our faces. I nodded slightly. You're right, I said. Families do help each other. I paused. Then added, but families also don't throw parties in houses they needed help keeping, and then tell the person who helped that she's not family enough to be invited. That hit harder than anything else I had said. Because it wasn't about money. It was about meaning. Kelsey leaned back slowly, looking between us. I didn't know, she said. I believed her. Partially. She didn't know the details. But she knew enough to understand that things weren't as simple as they looked. You didn't ask, I said. Her mouth opened, then closed. Because that was true. My father exhaled sharply. So what he said, what do you want? An apology, recognition, a check. There it was. Transaction. Always back to transaction. I shook my head. I don't want anything, I said. That confused him more than if I had demanded something. Then what is this, he asked. This, I said, tapping the folder lightly, is the difference between your version and mine. And what does that change, he snapped. Nothing about the past, I replied. Everything about the future. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Explain. I met his gaze. Calm. Clear. If I'm not family at the table, I said, then I'm not the one holding up the house. Silence. Heavy this time. Kelsey's face went pale. My mother's grip tightened around her cup. And my father, for the first time since I had walked in, didn't have an immediate response. Because this wasn't something he could reframe. Or argue. Or talk over. It was a boundary. And boundaries don't negotiate. They'll adjust, he said finally, but his voice had lost something. Confidence. Certainty. Some things will, I said, some things won't. I reached into my bag again. Pulled out a second sheet. Set it beside the folder. What's that, he asked. Resources, I said. Accountant, tax advisor, someone who can help you restructure things properly. He stared at it. Then back at me. You're just walking away, he said. I picked up my keys. Yes. His jaw tightened. If you do this, he said, don't expect to come back when things turn around. I paused. Looked at him. Really looked at him. Dad, I said quietly, the only reason things ever turned around is because I was already there. I stood. Left the folder. Left the sheet. Left the version of the story that had worked for him for years. And walked out of the diner without looking back. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one holding it together anymore. I thought the diner would be the end of it. Not because everything had been resolved. Because I had said what needed to be said. There's a difference. Resolution is something both sides agree on. Clarity is something you decide for yourself. I had clarity. They still wanted resolution. And families like mine don't let go of that easily. The first few days after the meeting were quiet. Not peaceful. Just quiet. The kind that feels like a system recalibrating. Calls came in. Fewer this time. More measured. My father didn't call again. That told me something had shifted. Not in his thinking. In his strategy. He had moved from control to calculation. Figuring out what still worked. What didn't. And where I still fit into the equation. My mother called twice. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Not because I didn't care. Because I wasn't ready to be pulled back into a version of the story that required me to soften what had already been said. Kelsey texted. At first it was defensive. You didn't have to do it like that. You could have just talked to us. Then it changed. Slower messages? Longer pauses between them. I didn't know it was that much. I didn't know you were handling all that. That one mattered. Not because it fixed anything. Because it was the first sentence from anyone in that house that acknowledged reality without trying to reshape it. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. Because for years everything I had done had been immediate. Reactive. Available. This time I chose distance. Not as punishment. As space. There's a difference. A week later, the ripple effects started showing up in ways that didn't involve me directly. Which is how you know something is real. When it doesn't need you present to keep moving. Kelsey called. I answered. Not out of obligation. Because I wanted to hear what had changed. Her voice sounded different. Less controlled. Less certain. Hey, she said. Hey. A pause. Then, things are weird here. I didn't ask what that meant. I let her explain. Dad's been going through stuff, she continued. Paperwork, calls, he's stressed. Of course he was. Stress doesn't disappear when the person absorbing it steps away. It spreads. What kind of stuff, I asked? She hesitated. Then carefully, I think there are things I didn't know about. I almost smiled. Not because she was struggling. Because she was finally seeing. That makes sense, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Why didn't you tell me, she asked? It wasn't accusatory. It was confused. Because from her perspective, I had withheld information. From mine, I had been protecting a system that didn't include me. I wasn't hiding anything from you, I said. I was handling what needed to be handled. That's the same thing she said. No, I replied calmly, it's not. She didn't argue. Because she didn't have the full context yet. And I wasn't going to force it on her. That wasn't my role anymore. I'm sorry, she said after a moment. The words came out awkwardly. Like she wasn't used to saying them without a qualifier attached. I let them sit. Didn't rush to accept. Didn't dismiss them either. Just let them exist. For what I asked. For the post, she said. For the caption. I didn't think... I know, I said. Because she hadn't. That was the problem. She hadn't thought about what it meant to define family in a way that excluded the person holding up part of the structure. She had thought about the photo. The moment. The way it looked. Not the reality behind it. I didn't think it would matter that much, she added. That line echoed something my mother had said. They didn't think I'd mind. Because I hadn't made them think I would. That's fair, I said. It surprised her. You're not mad, she asked. I said honestly, I'm not anymore. What changed? I stopped expecting it to be different. Silence. Then quieter, Dad keeps saying you're overreacting. Of course he did. Because acknowledging the reality would mean acknowledging his part in it. And what do you think I asked? She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was softer. I don't actually know everything that's going on. That was enough. Not truth. Not clarity. But the beginning of it. We talked a little longer. Not about the house. Not about the money. About neutral things. Work. Schedules. Small pieces of life that didn't require either of us to defend anything. When we hung up, I felt something unfamiliar. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Distance. The healthy kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled immediately. Weeks passed. Then a month. Information filtered in indirectly. Through Kelsey. Through small comments. Through the absence of things that used to be constant. The house was still there. But it wasn't effortless anymore. Decisions had to be made. Numbers had to be faced directly. Without the buffer. Without the quiet adjustments that kept everything smooth. My father didn't call. Not once. Until he did. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Then I did. Hello? A pause. Then his voice. Aaron. Not sharp. Not controlled. Just tired. I'm not calling about money, he said immediately. That told me exactly what he thought I expected. Okay, I replied. Another pause. I found something he said, one of your mom's old recipe cards. Thought you might want it. I leaned back in my chair. Out of all the things he could have said, that's what he chose. You can mail it, I said. Silence. Then, did you really think I meant that, he asked? There it was. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement. A question. Framed in a way that still left room for interpretation. I could have answered a dozen ways. Explained. Argued. Revisited everything. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. You called it family, I said, and I wasn't there. He exhaled. Long. Slow. Like something had finally settled in a place he couldn't move it from. I didn't think he started. I know, I said. We ended the call there. No resolution. No closure. Just truth. A few days later, the recipe card arrived. My mother's handwriting. Faded slightly at the edges. I held it in my hands longer than I expected. Because some things still mattered. Even if everything else had changed. People ask me sometimes, friends, coworkers, if I regret it. If I regret the comment. The timing. The way I handled it. It's always framed like a question about kindness. About whether I could have done it differently. More gently. More privately. More acceptably. I don't think so. Because the comment wasn't the cause. It was the moment something invisible became visible. And once that happens, you can't undo it. You can only decide what you do next. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't expose everything. I didn't demand repayment. I just stopped being the part of the system that made everything look stable. And when I did, the system had to show what it really was. That's not revenge. Not the kind people imagine. It's something quieter. More permanent. It's the moment you realize you're allowed to step out of a role that was never acknowledged in the first place. The post disappeared in 3 minutes. The truth didn't. And neither did the consequences. If you've ever been the person holding something together while everyone else takes credit for how it looks, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what part of this felt familiar. We share stories like this every day because sometimes the only way to understand your own life is to hear it in someone else's voice. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and a little too close to home, make sure you're here for the next one. We're just getting started.